dead. Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hey, folks, and welcome back to the Enemies List podcast. I am your host, as always, Rick Wilson. I am thrilled to be joined today by Bill Adair. Bill is the founder of PolitiFact, a former St. Pete Times guy. To date myself a little bit, I grew up, Bill, in Tampa when we had three newspapers, the Tampa Tribune, the Tampa Times, and the St. Pete Times, delivered to our house every damn day. So you and I come from an older era a little bit, but the book you've written is very much about the modern era. It's called, folks, The Big Lie, Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today. Talk to us about your journey from PolitiFact to talking about how the Republican Party has embraced the big lie and the sort of constellation of other lies that surround it.
You bet. So my journey began as a political reporter, as you indicated, for the St. Petersburg Times, wonderful newspaper, and
it was
a newspaper that was willing to take some risks as a big regional paper in Florida. Ultimately, it became and is now the largest newspaper in Florida. And I worked there starting in the early 90s.
Right.
And I got to cover Florida politics initially in Florida, and then became the Washington bureau chief.
Right.
And when I was the Washington bureau chief covering Congress and the White House, I began to see all these lies and thought, we need to do more fact checking. And the big moment for me was the Republican convention in 2004. I was watching a speech by Zell Miller, a Democrat from Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
And I just remembered, and I just saw so many exaggerations and things that were distorting Senator Kerry's record. Senator Kerry, of course, was the nominee that year. And so I thought we need to do more fact checking. And so I did some in 2005, 2006. But by 2007, as we began to gear up for the presidential campaign, I thought we should do fact checking. We should do it a little bit differently. There was already factcheck.org, a great fact checking website. But I thought we could do it differently. We could create a rating system with a truthometer. And this would allow us to keep report cards on the politicians and kind of keep score. So I went to my editors that said, hey, let's do this. And they were totally up for it. And so we started PolitiFact in 2007, and it was a great success. Took us a while to get noticed. I would call the campaigns and be like, we're calling from PolitiFact, and they'd be like, Politico?
I believe there was any number of times you called a campaign of mine and I said, no.
Exactly. And there was this was also my introduction to partisan media, because as we got noticed, I was on Morning Joe, I was on CNN, and I was on Fox. And so Fox loved when we were fact checking Hillary and Obama, and they'd be like, have me on Fox and Friends and have me on the afternoon shows. And then by the time that it was clear that Obama was going to be the nominee, and I'd say, we need to do some fact checks on McCain, Fox was like, we're booked this week. We really don't need you.
Thanks so much.
So, but anyway, PolitiFact did very well. We won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for our coverage of the 2008 election, and we really, I think, sort of sparked the fact-checking movement in the United States and to a large extent around the world. So I was very proud of that. So I ran PolitiFact until 2013 when I came here to Duke. I am a professor of journalism and public policy here. I teach fact-checking, among other things. But I continue to do work with PolitiFact, setting up other state PolitiFact franchises, so to speak, particularly here in North Carolina. There's a very good one that I started with originally with the News and Observer, and now with WRAL-TV. So PolitiFact's great in that it works on senators and governors and basically anybody who says something in the political discourse. So that was sort of the first phase. So, but in 2020, I realized I need to speak up. And so I left PolitiFact and decided I was going to write this book, and it would allow me to come clean about what I had seen as a fact checker and allow me to say things that you just alluded to about the partisan imbalance in lies that I had not been able to talk about when I was the editor of PolitiFact.
So the subhead here, why Republicans do it more. I think it's because they've gotten away with it. And I think that the embrace of the big lie and of and a lot of the elite tier press not really calling it out consistently for the couple of years after January 6th. My theory of the case is it's increasingly comfortable and easy for them to lie because they've gotten away with it in a pretty meaningful way. What is your thought on that?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And that's one of the reasons that many people gave me that I mentioned in the book. But I think we also need to go back in history a little bit. Several people told me that we really, and one of the people was Glenn Kessler, the Washington Post fact checker, because to be clear, I'm not the only one who's noticed this. You know, this is, so I'm probably the most prominent person to speak up about it. There was a headline yesterday, now that he's retired, PolitiFact editor, reveals the truth about lying. But I'm not the only one who's noticed this pattern. So Glenn Kessler said something that many others said to me, which is that this pattern is rooted probably when Newt Gingrich took over the House in the early 1990s, because he changed the culture of the Republican Party, and he really cemented this culture of anything goes. Now, you can go back farther than that to Lee Atwater, to Roger Ailes, as sort of as beginning the anything goes culture, but it was probably Newt Gingrich who really cemented it. So that sort of set us on a path to this, I think. And then, as you said, I think the conservative media plays a giant role. Many people cited that, and you have to then look at that in the context of the conservative media ecosystem and the way that conservative voters get their information. So, this is, we're talking about a heavily gerrymandered country where on the House side, the vast majority of House seats are not competitive. And for people who live in Republican districts, Republican areas, they're getting overwhelmingly conservative messages from their media, from talk radio, from
Sinclair
Fox,
television stations, Fox, etc.
Yeah, and it's Salem Media, podcasts, and talk radio. So it's becoming, the red-blue divide is just getting starker, and so what that creates is a frictionless opportunity for Republicans to lie. They can lie without worry that their local reporter is going to come up to them and say, hey, you said this thing, it's not right. They're not going to face fact checkers. We did a study here at Duke where we looked at, well, where are the local fact checkers? Well, in half the states, there are none.
None,
so,
right.
So plus, even when there are fact checkers at local television stations largely, or at local newspapers, there are so few that politicians can lie without worry that they're going to get caught. I liken it to, speeding on a highway like the Autobahn. You don't have to worry about getting a speeding ticket because there are no state troopers,
Right.
So put all that together, then add Mike McCurry and some others gave me some other reasons for Republican lies, and that is a shrinking base. So
Absolutely.
with a shrinking base of older white voters, they have to keep them fired up, and to do that, they lie about issues such as immigration and other issues to try to keep them angry. And so if you watch Fox, it's just remarkable. I have my students do an assignment where they watch 2 hours of Fox and Friends and compare it to that day's New York Times or Washington Post. Now they can also watch 2 hours of Morning Joe, but when they watch Fox and Friends, they come back amazed at the repetition. Biden's border crisis, So anyway, and of course, so many of the things they say are just made up. They're just lies. And so anyway, that's the why that I explain in the chapter about why Republicans lie.
One of my deeper questions about Trump himself and the inability of media to fact check him at the speed and the scale at which he puts out falsehoods. Is there any mechanism that you can think of that gets us closer to being able to handle that? Because I see a few struggling. Daniel Dale does yeoman's work fact checking Trump. He does a lot of high speed fact checks. We saw a little bit of that during the ABC debate. But by and large, Trump never pays a price for lying over and over and over again. The press doesn't put a disclaimer on top of every quote saying, as usual, he's lying about X. I'm just fascinated, like, how would you address that problem? Because he is at a cataclysmic scale reducing faith and belief in facts in this country.
Absolutely. In fact, the New York Times had an interesting story last week that his supporters know he's lying, don't care. He doesn't mean it, and this just kind of confirmed what some of the don't take him literally things that had been said in the 2020 campaign, which is terrible. We can't take a politician literally.
Right.
So, this would be an interesting exercise. If the nation's news organizations on one day just decided, we're going to cover Trump, but every time he says something that's not true, we're going to leave a blank where the words are of the false thing that he said, and just like write a story, at a rally in Bethel, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump said, and just leave a blank of the false things he said. And the same thing you could do in video. And trying to rally his supporters, Donald Trump said
nothing. Right. You just leave an air gap.
Yeah. I think that would be a fascinating exercise. It's, I think he is such an outlier that he has in every way, ever since he came on the scene in really even before 2015 when he came down the escalator. But if we go back to even 2011 when he began to float and push the lies about Obama's birth, he's tested the way that journalists approach their jobs. Journalism is based on evenness. This general approach that, we will approach the two political parties with evenness because we assume that the two political parties behave roughly the same. And that's not true anymore, of course, and that's and journalists continue to struggle with that because they want to show that they are even-handed, because then Republicans, and I get into this in a chapter near the end of the book, Republicans have been so good at working the ref, and
100%.
That
I can say, I worked the refs when I was a Republican. I called reporters. I called editors. I can't believe you're doing this. This is so unfair. You're so biased against us. I know the exact game they're playing. And they do it well. Let's be real. They actually do it. They're very effective in how much they, about how much they've been willing to call up reporters and just scream and scream and scream until they get their way.
And I worried about getting those calls, because, as a political reporter, you want to be fair. And I didn't want a call from you or anybody because I wanted to be known as somebody who was fair. And so the reporters are torn, and yet they realize that I was talking to somebody who covers Trump the other day for a big news organization. And he's like, I love this job, because Trump is constantly available. Always comes back in the plane to talk. They can get him on the phone, and so that goes a long way. In terms of evenness, he overcomes his lying by playing the game extremely well, and even he'll say this news organization, they're terrible, but then on the plane he's like, hey, how are you, and
right. Yeah, I mean, we all know there's a list of reporters that he gets on the phone with late at night, and you hang up first. No, you hang up first. You hang up. Right. No, you hang up first. I mean, it really is. It really is like a. And look, a lot of these reporters are caught in a vice. They are getting the best access at the top of the pyramid of Trump sources, because, folks, just so y'all know, about 25% of the unnamed sources in the Trump campaign or in the Trump White House were Donald Trump himself.
Exactly. I told my students that the other day. I was like, you guys need to know that when you see senior White House official, sometimes it is the most senior White House official.
It really is something that there's a rule that I've had that I learned back in when I worked for the first President Bush. And somebody said to me one time, he goes, good White Houses leak on purpose. Bad White Houses just leak. And in Trump's case, it was just leaking. But he was the biggest of the leakers. These stories in the Times that you would see over and over and over again, and everybody knows who I'm talking about. These Trump is losing faith in Jeff Sessions or whatever. That was Donald Trump himself. You hear these things playing out in the campaign. That's Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But so they God love her, but and it doesn't diminish that there's actual reporting going on there, but the knowledge that Trump is a lying liar who lies doesn't seem to color the desire from media outlets across the spectrum to talk to him as if he's not lying to them. And I just feel like it's so sui generis, it's so above scale that I find it, I don't know how you unwind the ethical conundrum here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's tough because on one hand, we want to be inside we journalists want to be inside his world to know what he's really going to do. And particularly now, because I think he's going to do scary things. And and yet, as we do that, we are enabling him to continue to lie.
So talk to us a little bit about the pendant danger to democracy as lying has become so institutionalized, particularly on the right, but not exclusively. I'm not going to say that there are not Democratic politicians who bullshit pretty heavily, folks. But on the right, we've seen a spectrum of behaviors that the big lie itself, which has encouraged violence and election denialism, and is about to do it all over again. We're watching in real time as they prep the lie for 2024. Talk to us about how you see that as an immediate danger to democracy.
Yeah, it's really scary. Jonathan V. Last had a projection about this a few days ago that made me think of an exercise I might do with my students, which is let's write Donald Trump's speech that he's going to give on election night today, and write the lies. We could write the lies now. There were more voters there were more votes cast in Philadelphia today than there were registered voters. That kind of claim will be said about some city. And you could we could predict the lies that will be made about the election. And then they will become conservative talking points and become sort of the conventional wisdom. And so I was thinking about giving this maybe as an extra credit assignment, and then the student who best predicts the speech, gets the most extra credit point.
Right.
But anyway, I'm being somewhat facetious to make a really scary point that we could have a constitutional crisis. We could have complete chaos in November because of these lies, and these lies are being concocted now. We've seen, what did he say just this week about mail-in ballots? So sort of laying the foundation once again to make the case against mail-in ballots. So I think that's the most serious thing that could, as my subtitle says, burn down our democracy. Now, getting past that, the lies make it impossible to have a conversation about climate, because climate change is unmistakable. But Republicans, after showing some inclination, there was a period where Republicans began to acknowledge climate change, and now they seem to have gone back to denial. And Elon Musk, to me, is an interesting outlier in this, because as somebody with the world's premier electric vehicle company, he's supporting the Republicans.
Right. Make it make sense.
But that's another serious thing, that we can't have serious conversations about climate and immigration because of all these lies. It's really worrisome, and it's so much different than the way it used to be because of the media ecosystem, because of social media.
Right.
And then, of course, NBC News had an interesting story the other day about the role that Russia is playing in sort of seeding some of these things.
Absolutely.
That's this sort of extra factor in all this. And so it's really worrisome.
Yeah, I think that we have undercounted and underscored for a while now that there's a benefit to outside actors inserting fake information, inserting fake ideas, inserting fake fake propaganda into our system. There's a benefit to them, even if it just confuses people, even if it just causes people to say, shit, I don't know what's real anymore. I can't tell. Well, I mean, I think that is a thing that really is undercounted, and in terms of the propaganda effort on the part of our foreign adversaries to make America distrust everything. Sometimes it's just like throwing chum in the waters of the shark circle. You don't know what's going to get eaten, but the sharks are making a big mess in the water.
Absolutely. And, here in North Carolina where I live, I think this was this was a possible defense for Mark Robinson when he was accused of, or not accused, when CNN's blockbuster report broke about the terrible things that he had posted on various websites. And there was a moment where I think people were, was that real? And but what CNN did that was so tremendous was, if you read the story, they just proved beyond any doubt this was Mark Robinson who was doing this. And but that was his really only hope. And for so many other things, there is doubt. And the politicians prey on that quite well.
How much thought have you given to the rise of extraordinarily convincing deepfakes? We're still not quite there where it's where a deepfake video, for instance, last week, these right wingers released this phony accusation that Tim Walz had an inappropriate affair with a young man, and they released this video that was quite obviously still AI. How much thought have you given to what we need to do, not only in American political society, but in media? How do we start to assess and invalidate these deep fakes that are going to be hitting Americans in ways that are not mediated, that are not through, because no serious journalist is going to carry a deep fake that makes an accusation like that anywhere. They're not even going to report it, as a possibility, but it's going to hit people through Twitter and Facebook and Discord and 4chan and 8chan and all this other, this constellation of bullshit infrastructure that's out there to amplify these things. How does the media deal with the rising deep fake problem?
Sure. I've given a lot of thought to it. In fact, we have a team here at Duke that I oversee that worked with Google and Facebook to develop standards and a terminology that all fact checkers use to describe any kind of manipulated video or image. And that terminology is then used and tagged in their fact check articles. We call it's called media review, and it's a way that they remain consistent, and it really helps Google to know, okay, this is a manipulated video. This is a video that is, just taken out of context, that kind of thing. So,
right.
But you're right that deep fakes have not hit yet. And it's interesting to me, and it shows the complexity in creating them. We've been talking about deep fakes for about 10 years. I remember attending a conference at Harvard in 2014 talking about them. And I've often likened them to a hurricane that is, off in the Atlantic, but hasn't hit the mainland yet.
Right.
And I think they really are really difficult to make effectively, but we're a lot closer today than we used to be. And what we have had instead are cheap fakes, which are videos that are that edited in a very rough way. We have the one that, let's assemble some clips to make it look like Nancy Pelosi is drunk. And there have been, countless videos like that have been made. But the deep fake, the true, Barack Obama saying things that he didn't really say, AI generated video, we're getting closer to that. So the fact checkers are, I wouldn't say ready, because the challenge is detecting them.
Sure.
But the fact checkers are talking about this all the time at our conferences. So I helped start the International Fact-Checking Network, the Global Association of Fact Checkers, and we meet once a year. And we just had our meeting this year in Sarajevo, and there were conversations about this and how to detect it. But it's something that takes. It's interesting that the bad guys always start cheap, but then they get better and better and better. And so we need to keep an eye on the cheap fakes, because they're going to signal to us where the deep fakes are going. But we also need to work closely with the tech companies to try to be good at detecting them.
Yeah, that's a race we're going to have to, I think, put the hammer down on a little more effectively than we have so far. So I want to ask you one last question before we let you go. Does this feel like a battle we're losing to you?
Well, it definitely doesn't feel like a battle we're winning. But I'm an optimist, and I do feel like the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. But it is a long road. And I think that whether it's detecting and combating generative AI and the various things that can be done with it with bad intentions, or just outright lying, I think we need more horsepower. We need more people.
Right.
Foundations, it's interesting. Foundations were big on this for a while, and then they kind of pulled back. I think they lost their enthusiasm for fact checking and sort of things. I think fact checking, and this is also tribute to the conservatives, fact checking became a bad word.
Sure.
But we need to realize that fact checking is part of establishing the ground truth so that we can have a healthy discourse in this country. It's really a vital part of journalism, and we need to invest in it in every way. The for-profit companies need to support it. The not-for-profit efforts need to support it, because it's all about truth.
Exactly. Well, folks, the book is Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying and Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy, by Bill Adair. Bill, thank you for coming on the show today. I'm very grateful for your time, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Rick.
All right, folks, I want to talk to you for a moment about Polymarket. None of you have heard of Polymarket until this year. It is an offshore online betting site owned in part by Peter Thiel and some other folks. And it has become the right-wingers' go-to message point to say, Trump's odds of winning are 4,000% to 1, and to push out this narrative about where the race actually stands. I want to issue this as a note of caution, because I do believe that betting markets have a valid place in society. I think people in large numbers have this sort of Delphic ability to see where things are. But Polymarket isn't that. It's owned by a guy who is very much not an advocate of American democracy. It is owned by a guy who says it publicly. He's not in for Trump. He's in for Trump. And the structure of it is both mathematically unsound and politically unsound, but it is convincing millions and millions of Americans to look at this race in a way that isn't real. And the MAGA folks are clinging to Polymarket now, as a lot of the other averages aren't working out the way they thought, as this thing that's very much like they're holding it up like this totemic thing, like, oh, well, Trump's ahead in Polymarket, therefore it's real. It's not real, y'all. There are 4 accounts, 4 anonymous accounts, placing orders paid through by Bitcoin, blah, 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 that are dumping massive pro-Trump bets into this market. It's altering what the market looks like. These 4 accounts that are accounting for this massive swing on Polymarket's odds for Trump, we don't know who they are. They all trade at the same time. Weirdly, they all tend to trade in Moscow time. I don't know. Call me crazy about that. I don't know what that's all about. But this idea that this one website is going to call this race is absurd. And, I always caution people, polling is a broken institution. We do a lot of it, but we do it very carefully and methodically, and we don't use traditional methods alone. We don't just call landline phones where grandpa answers and has an hour and a half to chat. But Polymarket is the anonymous nature of these massive bets that are altering the market. It should set off every alarm in your head. And honestly, for right now, until Polymarket has some transparency, they're on the enemies list.